The year 2026 did not arrive with the clean, futuristic chime of a high-resolution synthesizer. It arrived with the wet, digital crunch of an overcompressed MP3, played back through a smart speaker that was constantly listening for keywords to sell you vacuum cleaners. It was a decade of hyper-compressed audio and automated optimization, where every sound was scrubbed, polished, and repackaged for maximum conversion rates. For Dmitrii Cohen, the future smelled like damp cardboard, stale tobacco, and lukewarm coffee from the bodega on the corner of 34th Avenue. He sat in his fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, staring at a computer screen that was actively rendering his irrelevance in real time. The room was hot, the humidity of a late May afternoon sticking to his skin like a second shirt, and the window was cracked just enough to let in the metallic rattle of the N train passing over the elevated tracks on 31st Street. A year ago, Dmitrii had been a minor cybersecurity folk hero, the man who had weaponized a mutant Rickroll virus to dismantle a multi-billion-dollar, pig-butchering, crypto scam run by the Blue Lotus Triad. For about 3 weeks, his podcast, The Noise Floor, had spiked to the top of the tech charts, and production companies optioned his life story for documentaries that were eventually killed by corporate mergers. The memory of that case still had a strange, electric crackle. The Triad had operated call centers across Southeast Asia, using sophisticated deepfake voice models to impersonate relatives and romantic interests, fleecing thousands of victims of their life savings. Destiny's involvement had started as a freelance consulting gig, but his obsessive ear for audio anomalies had led him to discover a microscopic phase modulation watermark hidden in the Triad's synthetic voice streams. They were using a proprietary deep learning algorithm, training it on stolen voice recordings and running real-time inference on GPU clusters. They had embedded a subtle phase shift into the audio, a digital fingerprint they used to track their own synthetic agents and prevent spoofing. Dmitrii had spent 3 sleepless weeks reverse engineering their voice generation software. He wrote a Python script that connected to their fast MCP servers, intercepted the JSON payloads containing the audio weights, and injected a malicious, recursive loop. The payload, a mutant variant of Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, encoded as an out-of-bounds spectral feedback wave, exploited a memory buffer overflow in their inference engine. Every time their systems tried to generate a voice, the model entered a feedback loop that destroyed its own weights and spat out clipping, distorted 80s synthpop. The collapse was total, exposing their command servers. He had sat in glass-walled offices in Flatiron, drinking cold brew on tap while 20-something VCs in Patagonia vests talked about building a decentralized audio firewall. Dmitrii had nodded, smiled, and waited for checks that never materialized. The meetings always ended in silence, followed by a polite rejection email weeks later. But heroism, Dmitrii had learned, has a remarkably short half-life in the digital age. By the spring of 2026, the world had moved on, and it had done so at the speed of an automated software update. The venture capitalists stopped calling, the production companies dissolved into tax write-off voids, and Dmitrii was back where he started, cleaning up muddy audio for local podcasters who were barely making enough ad revenue to cover their hosting fees. "Analyze and clean," Dmitrii muttered, clicking a button on his DAW. On the screen, a waveform of a local real estate agent's podcast was displayed. The recording was terrible, captured on an iPhone in a kitchen with marble countertops, the audio bouncing around the hard surfaces like a ping-pong ball. A year ago, Dmitrii would have spent 3 hours manually drawing automation curves, using spectral repair tools to surgically remove the reflections, the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant wail of an ice cream truck. He would have charged $300, and it would have been a work of craftsmanship. Now, he watched as a progress bar slid smoothly from left to right. Processing, Lyria, clean, v4.2. 100%. In less than 3 seconds, the waveform transformed. The reflections vanished. The refrigerator hum was replaced by a synthesized comfort dither. The real estate agent's voice was resynthesized, his slight lisp ironed out to match the statistical average of a public speaker. The software had analyzed his raw vocal profile, compared it to 10,000 professional artists, and rebuilt the audio. It wasn't actually his voice anymore, it was a generative approximation that sounded 10% more professional and 50% less human. And it cost the real estate agent exactly 4 cents per minute of audio, billed directly to his Google Lyria Enterprise subscription. 4 cents, Dmitrii said to the empty room, his voice flat against the acoustic foam panels glued to his walls. "I'm being outpriced by electricity. How does anyone compete with a system that has no overhead and requires no sleep?" He looked at the computer monitor, where a notification from his bank app was hovering. His balance was $1,420.50. Rent was due in 5 days, and the real estate agent was his last client. The automated podcast cleaning service had taken the rest of his client roster over the winter. They had all sent polite emails thanking him for his work but explaining that they had transitioned to automated audio pipeline solutions. It was a polite way of saying they had replaced him with a script. Destiny leaned back in his squeaking mesh chair. The chair, a Herman Miller knockoff he'd found next to a dumpster in Long Island City, was losing its hydraulic pressure. Every 20 minutes, the cylinder would leak a tiny hiss of pressurized nitrogen, causing the seat to sink toward the floor. Destiny would sit there, slowly descending, until his knees were bent at an awkward angle and his chin was level with the desk. He would reach down, pull the steel lever, and feel the jarring lurch of the piston lifting him back up, a physical metaphor for his career sinking into the floorboards. He looked around the apartment. In the corner sat his Prophet 6 analog synthesizer, its wood panels glowing in the afternoon light. Next to it was a rack of outboard gear, a vintage Universal Audio 1176 compressor, a physical tape delay, and a pile of tangled XLR cables. In 2026, these were no longer tools, they were historical artifacts, heavy and temperamental. They required maintenance and time, a luxury that had been engineered out of the loop. The music industry had undergone what the tech blogs called the Great Alignment, which was a polite way of saying it had been strip-mined for training data. Nobody wrote beats anymore. You didn't sit down with a keyboard or a drum machine and struggle to find a melody. You opened a browser tab, typed a prompt like /generate atmospheric synthwave with a sense of midlife regret, 120 BPM, mastering optimized for TikTok speakers, and waited 10 seconds. The system would output a fully produced, mixed, and mastered track. It was mathematically perfect, optimized by neural networks to trigger dopamine release in the average listener. It was everywhere. It was in the elevators, the commercials, the video games, and the playlists that people listened to while they slept. It was an endless, self-generating ocean of pleasant, forgettable sound. Destiny called it the smoothness. It was music without a single mistake or a single moment of human hesitation. It was a world without a noise floor. In classical audio engineering, the noise floor was the tape hiss on a cassette or the hum of an amplifier, the physical reality of the medium. In 2026, the noise floor was a digital injection. The algorithms realized that absolute silence made listeners uncomfortable, so they injected a synthetic comfort dither, a mathematically generated noise that mimicked the warmth of tape hiss but was devoid of randomness. It was a fake noise floor designed to make the artificial silence feel natural, processed by servers that calculated the static required to keep the human ear from realizing it was listening to nothing. His phone buzzed on the desk, the vibration rattling a half-empty mug of cold coffee. The screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern that made it hard to read his notifications. It was a text from Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah, are you watching the stream?" Destiny picked up the phone, his thumb dragging across the cracked glass. "Destiny, which one? There are 4 million people live generating music right now. My feed is clogged with simulated saxophone solos." "Sarah, the Neo Macau channel. They just launched the new Lyria 3 API. It's generating live vocals that are indistinguishable from 90s Whitney Houston, but she's singing about decentralized logistics. It's pulling real-time freight data from the port of Shenzhen and turning it into 5-part harmony." Destiny, sounds like hell. Why would anyone want to listen to a diva sing about shipping containers? "Sarah, it is hell. But the stock price just went up 12%. The market loves optimization. I'm in the Catskills. The trees are quiet, but the local smart grid is humming at a weird frequency. I think they updated the local nodes to use a new high-frequency powerline communication protocol. It's this constant 14.7 kHz whistle in the walls. I can hear it in my teeth." Destiny, that's just the sound of progress, Sarah. Or tinnitus. Have you tried turning off the main breaker? Sarah, if I turn off the breaker, the satellite backup beeps. It's all connected. I tried to record natural noise yesterday, wind in the hemlocks and the creek, on my old Nagra. But the tape was full of a low-frequency drone from the cargo corridors overhead. They run flights every 10 minutes. Even the wilderness has a digital floor now. There's no clean signal left. Destiny, There never was. We just had lower resolution back then. How is the analog sanctuary otherwise? Sarah, I'm growing heirloom tomatoes that taste like water because the soil is too acidic, and my hands are covered in splinters from trying to rebuild the porch. But at least I'm touching wood instead of a keyboard. You should come up here. The air is cold and the coffee is terrible, but it's real. We can drink cheap rye and argue about whether the MPC 60 had a better swing algorithm than the MPC 3000. Destiny, I can't afford the bus ticket, Sarah. Rent is due. And my last client just replaced me with a script. Sarah, the real estate guy. Destiny, yeah. He figured out he can run his raw audio through a fast MCP server that connects to the Lyria API. It strips the room echo, levels the volume, and fixes his grammar for the price of a stick of gum. I'm officially a legacy format. Sarah, we're all legacy formats, Destiny. Some of us just haven't been deleted yet. Write me back when you get a chance. Destiny tossed the phone back onto the desk. It landed next to a stack of unpaid bills and a plastic container of half-eaten pad thai. Sarah had retreated to the mountains, trying to build an analog sanctuary where she could grow heirloom tomatoes and pretend the internet didn't exist. She was trying to preserve a version of the world that had already been compressed and archived. But even there, the smart meters and the low-orbit satellite constellations kept her connected to the machine. There was no escape from the grid. He stood up, his knees cracking like dry twigs, and walked to the window. Below him, Astoria was a blur of delivery drones and electric delivery vans moving in silent, coordinated patterns. The street was clean, optimized, and dead. On the sidewalk, a teenager walked by, wearing a pair of spatial audio glasses that projected a virtual concert into his retinas. The kid was nodding his head to a beat that existed only for him, generated in real time by an algorithm that was tracking his heart rate and pupil dilation to keep him in a state of maximum engagement. The song was unique to him, a custom-tailored sonic feedback loop designed to prevent him from ever looking up and seeing the gray queen sky. We're just bioreactors for their engagement metrics, Destiny muttered, his forehead resting against the cool glass of the window. He turned and walked back into the room, his eyes falling on the Prophet 6. He turned it on. The old machine took a few minutes to warm up, its analog oscillators drifting slightly in pitch as the circuits heated. That drift was what made it sound alive. It was the physical reality of electricity moving through copper and silicon, reacting to the ambient temperature of the room, to the humidity, to the age of the capacitors. It was unpredictable, imperfect, and human. He sat down in his chair. As if on cue, the cylinder hissed, and he sank 3 inches. He didn't bother pulling the lever this time. He just reached up to the keyboard from his lowered position, feeling like a child sitting at a dining table. He remembered the workflow of his youth, back when making a beat was a tactile, physical struggle. He thought of his old Akai MPC, the thick gray pads that required a solid strike to trigger a sample. He remembered setting the swing to exactly 58% on a 16th note grid. That was the magic number, the golden ratio of boom-bap hip-hop. It shifted the even-numbered 16th notes just enough to create that lazy, human pocket, the J Dilla groove that could never be captured by a straight grid. He remembered the hours spent slicing drum breaks from old vinyl, using the Q-Link sliders to sweep a low-pass filter until the bass line sat perfectly under the kick drum. It was a process of discovery, of working within limitations, of finding beauty in the dust and the hiss of the samples. Now, all of that was gone. The modern producer didn't sample, they prompted. They didn't listen for the magic in a dusty record, they adjusted the temperature slider on a generative model running stable audio or Lyria 3 model API. He pressed a key on the Prophet. A low, warm C natural bloomed from the speakers. It was rich, slightly fuzzy, and completely unoptimized. The oscillator drifted slightly, a tiny fraction of a hertz, creating a subtle, organic chorus effect that no digital synthesizer could perfectly replicate without a complex randomness generator. He pressed another key, holding down a minor chord. The sound vibrated in his chest. It felt real. It felt heavy. But then he looked at the computer monitor, where the bank notification was still mocking him. Destiny let go of the keys. The chord faded away, leaving only the quiet, high-pitched whine of his studio monitors and the distant rumble of the N-train passing over the elevated tracks on 31st Street. The noise floor of his life was rising, and he was running out of dynamic range. He needed a change. He needed a workflow that didn't involve typing sentences into a text box and waiting for a machine to tell him what art sounded like. He needed to touch something. He needed to hit something. He grabbed his coat and keys. The air in the apartment was stifling, thick with the smell of old dust and defeat. He needed to walk. He needed to find a corner of the city that hadn't been fully optimized yet, if such a place still existed in the year 2026.